Good morning. Welcome to episode 106 of Duval Rundown. My name is Gus Logue. Today I'm joined as I am each and every Friday by the one and only Hacker. You can catch him on his show, Hacker After Dark, each weekday on 92.5 and 1010XL from 8 to 10 p.m. Hacker, happy to have you as always. Welcome back to the show.
Gus, glad to be here, man. It's been quite the week locally with the Gators winning the title and the Jaguars back to work this offseason. So, yeah, it should be a lot of fun today.
Absolutely. We did have Zach Goodall on Wednesday's show, episode 104, if you are looking for some more Gator talk. But trying to put that aside, as excited as I am for my Florida Gators and our Florida Gators collectively at 1010 and really in Jacksonville for everyone who's a fan. This is a Jaguars podcast, so we're here to talk about the Jaguars. Obviously, as you said, the Gators are really exciting, but we did have some news in Jacksonville, or not really occurrences happening because players reported back for the first time this offseason for the start of the offseason training program on Tuesday. And on Wednesday, there's media availability with Liam Cohen, Trevor Lawrence, and Foye Oluokun. So we've got another discussion on deck for today, Hacker, talking kind of general standpoint about whether the Jaguars' roster improved this offseason so far when you look at not just their additions, but their departures. But before we get to that, I did want to make sure that we talked about Wednesday's media availability. And so I really just have one main thing that I wanted to talk about, but was there anything from Wednesday that stuck out to you that you think is noteworthy?
I think Foye Oluokun a couple of times talked about the young youth movement with the coaching staff, the energy that they've provided in a very short amount of time for the players. Obviously, you could tell that it's probably a different feel in that building that the players have from this coaching staff compared to what they had last year. And for Foye to mention that on two separate occasions, I thought was interesting. And then the footwork, I guess, was interesting with Trevor Lawrence. The fact that they need to work on his footwork, according to Liam Cohen, and Trevor basically agreed with that, saying, yeah, I've known for a while that I've had some weaknesses there that I need to work on. I don't really know what Doug Peterson and Press Taylor were doing the last 3 years, but those were the biggest takeaways for me.
Yeah, totally agree with you on Foye. I think it was actually cool to hear him say that like the coaches are bringing some good energy because energy has definitely been a big buzzword from mostly Liam Cohen, but also a little bit of James Gladstone. Tony Baselli might have mentioned it too, even, but just how like part of the culture change that they're trying to implement in Jacksonville is by just bringing energy to the plate, not just on the field and like on game days, but also in meeting rooms, in the locker room, in the weight room, et cetera, et cetera. And so like it's one thing for kind of like the top brass in the Jaguars organization between Cohen and Gladstone, et cetera, to be saying those things, but then actually hear it from a player and say like, yeah, the energy from Coach Campanile is really awesome. The energy from Cohen is awesome. I think that was important to hear and good to hear. But certainly my biggest takeaway for sure was Trevor talking about his footwork. This originally started because Liam Cohen had an interview with SiriusXM a week or two ago, and he said that the Jaguars and him will be diving into Trevor's footwork. And I think he said the stroke is a stroke, as in like the upper body mechanics kind of is what it is. But he thinks that there's can be more work done in terms of the footwork and kind of tying the footwork to like the mind of the quarterback. And Trevor agreed to read out his quote. He said, quote, yeah, there's just some things that I've known about my footwork over the years of playing that I feel like have been a little bit of a weakness, blah, blah, blah. The system is built around, as in Liam Cohen's system is built around timing and tying your feet to your progression and playing on time so it allows you to get backside. It allows you to get to checkdowns and whatever it may be, and you can feel comfortable playing on time. And more than any system I've ever learned, it's structured and based on that. So everything's tied to exactly, all right, this route is on this timing, then your next progression is off this footwork, off this timing. So it all ties in perfect. You don't have multiple routes declaring at the same time, which is hard as a quarterback because then you're sitting back there and you've got to make a decision before really the guy's open or covered. So I think they've been doing a really good job with the system, really thinking through how does it tie into a quarterback's feet. And so I think, like, I guess the point that I want to make is that, like, obviously Trevor admitted himself that it is an area that he needs to improve. But I also think that, like, it's an area that he needs to improve partly because, like, previous schemes haven't helped him out. When he said that quote that I just read out loud, I immediately thought back to, like, really Doug Peterson's offense as a whole, but specifically when they matched up against Gus Bradley's Colts defense. because there was multiple games where this happened, but there was one game where the Jags played the Colts, and the Jags ran like a curls concept 8 different times in the game, and so it was like, but the curls concept was like they would have 3, if not 4, different pass catchers like go out and run a curl at the same depth. And so that works out pretty well against Gus Bradley's scheme because like it doesn't really change the coverage a lot post snap. There's not a lot of disguises, and so Trevor was able to say before the snap, okay, like I know all these curls are going to like this area of the field. Let me figure out beforehand like who's going to be open, and then I'll fire it away. But I think that's kind of like example of like the whole Doug Peterson offense. It was kind of like, especially like that against defenses like Gus Bradley. But there was a lot of times where it was like, okay, all 4 guys are running the exact same route, and it's up to Trevor to decide, mostly before the snap even happens, which receiver is going to be open and where he should go with the ball. And so I think that, long story short, the past schemes did not do a ton of help for Trevor Lawrence, especially as it relates to progressions. It was kind of like choose who you're going to throw to before the snap based on what you think the coverage is going to be, rather than having a lot of like full field progressions where it's like, okay, if it's cover 2, then like this area is going to be open. If it's cover 3, then this area is going to be open. If they're playing good coverage, then like you'll be able to flip your hips and get to the check down on the other side of the field. And so there was definitely a lack of unpredictability in Doug Peterson and Press Taylor's offense. And I think that a big part of that is just that they made it so hard for the quarterback. And so again, Trevor has stuff to work on for sure. I'm not saying that he's perfect and that like if just going to the scheme is automatically gonna make him improve into a top 3 quarterback and a perennial MVP candidate. But I think it's a little bit on both sides where Trevor has work to do, but the scheme has a lot of work to do to help him out. And so yeah, I just thought that was a really cool discussion from Trevor on Wednesday. And so unless you have anything to add, we can just kind of hop into the roster improvement segment. But anything else from Wednesday, Hacker? Any follow up thoughts on that?
Well, just to summarize what you just said, and I agree with pretty much everything, I can summarize really quick. The offense last year sucked. The game plan, the playbook, it sucked. It was unoriginal. It's like the game had passed Doug Peterson and Press Taylor by. And there's part of me that feels bad for Trevor in the sense that if you go back to Clemson, this will be his 4th head coach, his 4th offensive coordinator, and his 4th different system in the last 6 years. I mean, that's crazy. You want to talk about why maybe he struggled to live up to expectations? Well, just zero consistency as far as coaches. Maybe that's put to bed now with Liam Cohen and Grant Udinski, and hopefully they'll be here for a while. But when you have to learn 4 different schemes in a 6-year stretch, I mean, that is absolutely wild.
Yeah, stability would definitely be a good thing throughout the organization, really, but especially when it comes to the quarterback position and just helping out Trevor Lawrence, which I know that we're all focused on the trenches here in Jacksonville, especially as it relates to what the Jaguars will do in the 2025 draft. But I think that helping out Trevor Lawrence is probably a priority 1, if not priority 1B, alongside building the trenches. So, yeah, those were our big takeaways from Wednesday's press conferences. Hacker, lead the way. I mean, I think it's a fair question of like, has the Jaguars' roster improved when you consider not just their additions again, but the departures of Brandon Sheriff, Andre Cisco, Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram, etc. And so, where do you want to go from here?
Yeah, one of the things I always like to do when they report back for off-season workouts, and again, this conversation, Gus, will change in a couple of weeks with the draft because they're going to bring in 10 draft picks, some undrafted free agents, and we can talk about it again, a month from now. But I always think back to when the season ended, right? Was it January 6th in Indianapolis to where they are now when they report back to work the week of April 8th. A lot of new guys, 10 new free agents. Like you said, a lot of guys have left. They didn't re sign any of their own guys, which is just mind boggling to think about. Is the roster better? And I think certain positions are clearly better. I think there's a position or two where you could argue it's probably worse. I'll go ahead and start. I don't know how you can say wide receiver is better just because Christian Kirk for De'Ami Brown on the surface right now, that looks like a downgrade. Now, De'Ami Brown could have a great year. And Kirk obviously had gotten hurt the last couple of years. Tight end, kind of the same thing. I don't know how you can say tight end is better without Evan Ingram. But on the flip side, Gus, I think the offensive line is clearly better just from a more depth standpoint. I look at the secondary: Jordan Lewis for Ronald Darby, Andre Cisco for Eric Murray. At very worst, that's a push. I would probably consider that an upgrade. So I think, like James Gladstone talked about, the bottom half of the roster is probably better. The fact that Ingram and Kirk are gone, you have questions at wide receiver and tight end. But again, talk to me in a couple of weeks after the draft, and it'll probably be a different conversation at that point.
Yeah, that's honestly exactly the way that I was thinking about it. I think that when you're looking at kind of quote unquote star power, the Jaguars got a little bit worse there between especially Christian Kirk and Evan Engram. But then in terms of filling out depth, like looking specifically at tight end, I think that's a perfect example where you let go of Evan Engram, who has like various uh, records. Like he had the second most receptions by a tight end in NFL history in 2023, I believe. So objectively, a very good player and made at least one Pro Bowl during his time in Jacksonville. And so you're losing out on that, but you are adding depth in two different pieces in Hunter Long and Johnny Munt. And so, like, I guess the ceiling, especially in the short term, maybe was a bit lowered by losing out on a handful of stars. But I would say the floor is higher because of all the depth pieces added. I think it is a good way of going about it, especially since, like, as we're talking about it now, it is like just free agency that we're reviewing. But like the thing is, like in general, you want to build through the draft, and so like Christian Kirk, Evan Engram, Brandon Scherf, these are all guys that were signed by Jacksonville as free agents. I mean, Andre Cisco obviously is a homegrown talent, but I think he only got a 1 year deal with the Jets, and so like certainly they made a lot of additions in free agency. I think it was 11 total guys. They had 9 guys on the first day, and then I think they're up to 11 right now. But like one or two or maybe three of them are going to be starters. It's again really filling out the depth of the roster so that hopefully you can draft and develop other players into superstars. But I also think it's important for us to have this conversation before the draft because I think that like we can get so swayed and like biased after the draft of like our own perceptions of like what players are good or what the team's needs are and stuff like that. But the draft is like everyone calls it a crapshoot. It's like pretty random, and so like from a very general standpoint, I feel like you should expect one, maybe two starters, one, maybe two contributors, and then a couple of like developing guys after that. And so like I feel like if we had this conversation after the draft, I think it's worth the while. But if anything, like that would probably like sway us in wrong directions. I think it is good to have this conversation before the draft, just because like we really don't know what is going to happen. Even like Brian Thomas Jr. last year, I think a lot of people were like not down on the pick, but a little bit lukewarm. And obviously, he turned out to be arguably the best, at least non-quarterback selection of the 2024 draft. And so, with so much unknown, I think it is important that we have this conversation now. But so to continue the conversation, do you think that this is like the right way to do it, or do you like would you have liked to see them like maybe hold on to one or two of the stars that they let go, or maybe try to go after one or two stars in free agency? Is there anything that like you might have done differently looking back on it?
I still want a third edge pass rusher, but I got a feeling that'll be addressed pretty high in the draft, if not round one, certainly in either round two or in round three. That's the one that puzzles me a little bit. I love what they did on the offensive line the more I've thought about it because you've brought in competition, you've upgraded the bottom part of the line. I really like McCarry and his versatility. Secondary wise, look, Andre Cisco was a fun guy to have here. He was a good name, like you said, a drafted player. He was awful last year. I mean, they're awful. There's no other way to say it. Now, was that Ryan Nielsen's fault? Maybe, but I mean, look, you bring in Eric Murray, and what did James Gladstone say time and time again? The safety position. It's supposed to be safe. Well, obviously, it was not safe with all the blown coverages. Now, was that Cisco's fault entirely? No, not all of it, but he certainly had some of the blame. So I think Eric Murray makes it a much safer secondary. Maybe not flashy or sexy. I don't think you're going to go out and buy season tickets because of Eric Murray, but he's a good safety that probably won't blow a lot of coverages. Jordan Lewis, again, I like him. Darby really struggled last year. So there were some aspects I really like what they did. Again, edge pass rusher needs to be addressed. There's certainly some things they need to bring in another wide receiver, but that's why I think they're going to fill a majority of those holes in the draft. So I'm pleased. I won't say pleasantly pleased. I'm not over the moon, but I'm pleased with what they did because I understand the vision that James Gladstone has.
Exactly. That's what I was kind of going to come back to is that like maybe like I think you can make a fair argument that the Jaguars roster did decline just from 2024 to 2025 as of right now with again the amount of free agents that they did not sign. They were the only NFL team in the league this year that did not re-sign one of their own impending free agents. Which shout out to you, Hacker, because I only learned that fact because you said a while ago that like the Jaguars haven't signed any impending free agents, and that was pretty rare.
Which is
Um,
a total indictment of Trent Baalke, by the way. Just
yeah,
awful.
clearly, the new regime looked at the roster and said, "Yeah, we got a lot of work to do." And so, again, I think if you look at 2024 versus the current state of the 2025 roster, you can make an argument that maybe they didn't improve. But I think when you're looking at the vision and the process and the potential long-term gains, then it certainly makes sense, and it could end up being an improvement over the long run. Rachis had a good point where De'Ami Brown finished the season with working knees, and Christian Kirk did not. A little bit harsh, but I think like the point of just like the fact that the Jaguars got younger is fair because Christian Kirk and Evan Engram don't really. They're certainly still in their prime, I would say, but like nearing the end of their prime. Brandon Sheriff, I think, is pretty much at the end of his prime. Andre Cisco, like I think because of injuries, we might not ever see his prime, and so the Jaguars kind of like got out of those types of player timelines and brought in a lot of guys, or even if they had like Eric Murray and Patrick McCarry, those are some versatile veterans who are not close to the end of their prime, I don't think. But then more so like guys like De'Ami Brown, Robert Hainsey, guys who are like on the second deal of their NFL careers. It definitely makes a lot of sense, especially when you consider how maybe not cheap they were, but they weren't expensive. The Jaguars, even if they did sign 11 total free agents, didn't really break the bank for anyone. So yeah, again, I think the process makes a lot of sense.
And like you said, they got a lot of money to spend in the future. They didn't break the bank on anybody, and it's different. This is one of the messages I had earlier in the week. You know, people talk about, well, Liam Cohen's only 39 and James Gladstone's only 34 and this, that, and the other. And I said, yeah, why don't they go get a Super Bowl winning coach? Let's see how that works out. Or why don't they go get a coach with national championships in college? Or why don't they get a coach with previous coaching experience, like, I don't know, a Malarkey or a Doug Marrone? You know, you can find flaw with anything, and some Jaguar fans, I think, have been beaten down so much over the years that they do find flaw with anything. Like I've told you, Gus, the entire offseason, and my message like this will be continuing. I'm like Phil Connors in Groundhog Day at the very end of that movie. Something is different, and anything different is good. And what the
Mm,
Jaguars have done this offseason has been different than what we've seen, certainly the last few years. And with the organization the way it has been win loss wise, the worst organization in the NFL over the last dozen years, I'm of the mindset that anything different is probably good here in Jacksonville based on the last 12 seasons. So the fact that we've seen different here in Jacksonville gets my approval.
absolutely, yeah. I'm honestly like glad that we're having this conversation of like, did the Jaguars improve their roster? Because I think that this is like a better sign for the team as opposed to us like coming here and being just gushing and saying like, oh my gosh, the roster is so much better. So I feel like
Remember
that's a little bit.
last year? Oh, Ronald Darby and Gabe Davis and
Yeah,
Darnell Savage
exactly.
and Eric Armstead. I mean, we were planning our Super Bowl trip last year.
Yeah, I feel like pretty much like three out of the four main off seasons that Trent Baalke had control, it was like really big spending sprees, and like that it's a little understandable to an extent because like you've got a little bit of pressure from like ownership to win, and obviously you want to keep your job and get good players into the building, but B, like they did draft Trevor Lawrence in 2021, which was I think the first year that Baalke was general manager, maybe it was the second. And
First
so
time it was a full time GM. That was the first year. Yep.
right. And so, like, when you have a franchise caliber quarterback or a quarterback that you think could be franchise caliber, you obviously want to surround him with not just helpful pieces on offense, but helpful pieces around the team to, like, make sure it's a winning team around him. And he's not doing all the heavy lifting. But I think that the Jaguars this year have done a good job of, like, not going too far on the other end where, like, they're not only, like, signing one or two depth pieces and that's it. Like, they're still making improvements at various position groups. And by and large, like even if they're not going like all in necessarily right now because they do have Trevor Lawrence on the roster. They're still adding pieces that will help them out and help out the team in general. And so after talking about it, I think it's a good approach. And like to go back to what I asked you about, like what I would change. Like you said, like a veteran edge rusher would have been nice, but Gladstone did say that like they're certainly planning on drafting at that position. They want the rookies to be able to get a chance to play right away. I think maybe the one thing that I would have done differently is signing a safety not named Eric Murray, I guess, because I was going to say sign Eric Murray and then another safety that's maybe a little bit younger, has a little bit more playmaking ability. But I've said this several times in the show, I'm sure, that I love the idea of a playmaking safety or just a playmaking middle of the field defender for the Jaguars because I feel like I haven't seen one in a really long time. Someone who can truly like generate turnovers on their own. That would make a really big difference. And so I wouldn't have minded seeing them make a little bit more of a splash at the safety position free agency, whether it was for Trevor Moehrig or the safety from Miami, whose name I'm currently blanking on.
Javon Holland.
Javon Holland, thank you. But at the same time, like even if the safety market in general is a little bit undervalued relative to other positions, those guys certainly got paid in large part because of the increase in the salary cap. So there, like I think for both of us, there's some things that we can nitpick at, but by and large, or as a whole product, I think that we're kind of buying in. So yeah.
Well, and you look at Eric Murray and Jordan Lewis as the two prime examples, and maybe you could argue Makari to an extent, although Makari I think is only 27, so he's a little different. But Lewis is 29, Murray's 31. They're placeholders. I mean, let's be honest. That's what they are. They brought them in because they think they're upgrades, maybe minor upgrades, but they're upgrades. They're going to draft a safety at some point in the draft, and whoever they draft in this year or next year will be the starter in 2027 when Eric Murray is gone. Gladstone and Cohen want their guys. They have 21 draft picks over the next 2 years. So if you go spend big money on a Javon Holland and you have to pay him 15, 16 million a year, well, all right. Or instead, you get Eric Murray at 31. You pay him, what are they paying him? 10 million a year or whatever it is. And then you draft a guy that you want and you pay him a rookie contract for 4 years. It's a process, man. It's a process. So I can see what Gladstone's doing and why he did not do some of those things.
Absolutely. Well, it's all about process, and it's certainly interesting to talk about the free agency process. One thing that we didn't even really mention is that I think objectively the team improves just by having a new regime. Like if you're including the front office and the coaching part of it, I think losing Doug Peterson, Press Taylor, Ryan Nielsen, Trent Baalke, and then bringing in the whole new staff, even if all of them are, or pretty much all of them are like first-time guys in their respective positions, I think that from what we've seen and heard so far, like there should be a belief that they're at least going to do better than the previous regime. Obviously, that makes a huge difference, and so that alone could like push the 2025 roster to be way better than 2024, at least in terms of results. But yeah, I thought that was a good discussion. I don't really have anything else, Hacker, but yeah.
No, I'm good, man.
If you are.
Yeah, I'm good, and I'm good. We're 13 days away from the draft. I know we're going to be doing draft night coverage here on the 1010XL social media channels. Looking forward to that, and we'll keep plugging away as the draft is on the doorstep.
Absolutely. Yeah, we will definitely have a lot of really great content, some live streams, graphics, draft trackers, etc. Once the draft weekend actually does end up coming. Just as a reminder, though, I will be out Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday of next week, but Nia O'Brien will be filling in for me. So I will see you guys on Thursday. Hacker, I'll see you next Friday. Thank you, as always, for joining. Thanks to everyone for watching and listening. Have a good weekend.